Physicians that participate in clinical research trials have exposure for a number of different things, depending upon where the trial is and what stage the trial is. But first and foremost, there is a medical malpractice insurance exposure to the extent that the patient was appropriately screened and evaluated to participate in the clinical trial. Additionally, if the physician is a lead investigator and or a sub-investigator, the physician has responsibilities back to the sponsor of the trial to conduct the trial in an appropriate way. That is, if the data is not collected appropriately or not kept track of appropriately, and or if the protocol is not followed and it requires that the trial be repeated in another venue, there's the potential that that error or omission by the physician, not specific to patient care but specific to administration of the trial, might result in the pharma company coming back against the physician and the physician having to fund potential financial obligations back to the pharma company. The exposures that a physician has that are not covered under a traditional medical malpractice insurance policy are those of administering the protocol and the obligations that they have back to the pharmaceutical company for conducting the trial in the method that the pharmaceutical company requires. It's very important before a physician enters into a clinical trial that the physician contact his or her malpractice insurer or his or her malpractice insurance agent to evaluate the particular components of the contract and ensure that both the insurance provisions in it, the indemnification provisions in it, as well as many of the other provisions that have a bearing on liability are evaluated, reviewed, and understood both by the insurer, who ultimately is backing the risk of the physician, but also by the physician in the circumstance where there may be the need for additional insurance to be purchased. A physician who's participating in a clinical trial really ought to be concerned about the potential for a products liability case. That is, in the event that not only the patient is alleging negligence of the provider, many times the patient's plaintiff attorney will also allege that the product itself was defective, or either in the manufacturing process or in some other way. And because the physician is the one that ultimately is the end vendor providing the product to the patient for the trial, there's the potential that the individual physician will also be caught up in the product liability case. It's very important when a physician writes an agreement with a pharmaceutical company that the pharmaceutical company indemnify the physician for any product defect allegations, while at the same time the pharma company will be asking the physician to indemnify them for any negligence in the care that's rendered to that particular patient. The liabilities when a physician gets involved in a clinical trial can be numerous. The most acute of the liabilities is that of patient care. So in the event that a patient suffers an adverse outcome during a clinical trial and it's alleged that either the physician administered the clinical trial inappropriately or that the patient should never have been a candidate for the clinical trial, both of those allegations can be very serious. Both of those allegations, however, are typically covered under a physician's traditional medical malpractice insurance policy. You know, the cost for an individual physician to maintain a clinical trials policy is anywhere on the low end from about $3,000 to $4,000 to the high end. I have some physician practices in my locale that pay as much as $15,000 to $25,000 if they're doing a lot of trials. That typically is going to provide $1 million of insurance and typically will come with a $5,000 or a $10,000 deductible. My recommendations for clients when they're getting into a clinical trials opportunity is to carefully review the clinical trials contract. Like many things in this particular space, the details of the contract and who is responsible for what and what obligations each party has in the event of an adverse outcome are critically important. Many physicians don't quite understand the severity potentially of signing an indemnification obligation back to a pharmaceutical company in their participation of a clinical trial. That is, if their particular patient has an adverse event as a result of the clinical trial, there many times will be an allegation that both the drug caused the adverse event as well as the physician's clinical care caused the adverse event. And in those circumstances, the pharmaceutical company is going to be coming to the physician and expecting the physician to stand between the pharma company and the plaintiff, and that is a precarious place for a solo physician to be.